The first indication that my carefully constructed life was being dismantled arrived not with a bang, but with a sterile digital chime from my laptop. It was 3:17 local time, a typically desolate hour in the temporary operations center, half a world away from what I still, foolishly, considered home. The notification was from the new security system, the one Laura had mockingly called my pre-deployment paranoia. An alert. Multiple motion detections, ground floor interior. System armed, away. My heart didn't race, it seemed to pause, a cold stone dropping into a very deep well. Paranoia, she'd called it. I called it prudence. Events would soon clarify which term was more accurate. I clicked open the live feed. The grainy night vision image resolved itself, showing the vague outline of our living room. 2 figures, one, taller, male, unfamiliar. The other moved with a sickening familiarity. Laura, my wife. They weren't panicking, not like typical burglars. They moved with purpose. The man pointing towards the study, Laura nodding. A flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He was gesturing towards my antique desk, the one that had belonged to my grandfather. It wasn't the desk itself they were after, I knew. It was the small, hidden safe behind a false panel within its knee-hole, a place I thought only I knew about. A place where I kept certain important documents and, until recently, a few valuable, easily transportable heirlooms. The coldness I felt began to coalesce into something harder, sharper. This wasn't a random break-in, this was an inside job, a betrayal so blatant, so audacious, it almost defied belief. Almost. Because a part of me, a quiet, observant part that I had tried to ignore for months, wasn't entirely surprised. The signs, as they say, had been there, subtle currents beneath the surface of our marriage. Laura's increasing detachment in the year leading up to this deployment, her vague explanations for late nights, the sudden new friends whose names I barely registered. Her spending habits had also shifted. Small extravagances at first, then larger ones, often met with defensiveness when I gently inquired. I was busy, often consumed by the preparations for my extended assignment, and perhaps too willing to attribute her moods to the stress of my impending absence. Before this last dispatch, something had felt different, more definitive. It wasn't one specific incident, but an accumulation of small dissonances, a growing sense that the foundations were no longer sound. It was this unease, this unvoiced suspicion, that had prompted more than just the advanced security system. I'd spent a quiet Saturday, 2 weeks before my flight, meticulously documenting our shared assets, reviewing our financial accounts, and moving certain irreplaceable items, my grandfather's chronometer, my mother's wedding band, things of sentimental rather than sheer monetary value, to a secure deposit box. I'd also updated my will and power of attorney, assigning the latter not to Laura, but to my sister, citing the complexities of international communication during my deployment as a convenient, plausible excuse. Laura had been oddly unconcerned, signing the revised documents with a dismissive wave of her hand, more interested in a call she'd just received. "Just boring legal stuff, right?" she'd said, already turning away. The security system itself was a piece of work. Not just motion sensors and cameras, but audio recording, remote climate control overrides, and even the ability to remotely lock or unlock specific internal doors, should the need arise. I'd overseen its installation myself, ensuring key components were discreet, their feeds encrypted and routed directly to my secure devices. Laura had seen the more obvious cameras, the control panel by the door, and rolled her eyes. "Are you expecting an invasion, darling?" she'd asked, a little too brightly. "It's just for peace of mind," I'd replied, keeping the full extent of its capabilities and my reasons for wanting them to myself. I even remembered her lover, a man I now recognized as Mark, a new acquaintance from her recently acquired yoga studio. Commenting during a barbecue how overkill the visible parts of the system seemed for our quiet suburban street. He'd said it with a smug little smile. The memory now tasted like ash. Watching them on the feed, methodically attempting to violate my home, my trust, my history, I felt a profound weariness, but beneath it, a steely resolve began to form. They thought I was far away, helpless. They had no idea what I had already done, or what I was now capable of doing. The initial shock had passed. Now, the methodical part of my brain, the part honed by years of complex problem solving in high stress environments, was taking over. Phase 1 of their betrayal was underway. Phase 1 of my response was about to begin. The man, Mark, was now prying at the false panel of the desk. Laura stood by, holding a duffel bag, looking impatient. They clearly believed they had all the time in the world, that I was nothing more than a distant, oblivious husband. I took a slow, deliberate breath, watching the cursor hover over the icon that would activate the high-decibel internal sirens. Not yet. Let them commit fully. Let them feel secure in their treachery. I saved a segment of the video feed, a clear shot of both their faces, their actions unambiguous. Evidence was paramount. My mind was already cataloging the necessary steps. Contact my lawyer, alert the local police department at precisely the right moment, ensure my sister was aware of the situation. The emotional toll would come later. For now, there was only the cold, clear imperative of action. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness, my trust for naivety. They were about to learn, in the most direct and irrefutable way, just how wrong they were. The dull ache of betrayal was now accompanied by a quiet, determined hum of anticipation. Not for revenge in its basest sense, but for the methodical restoration of order, for the inevitable balancing of accounts. They had started this, but I, with the pieces I had already quietly put in place, would most assuredly finish it. I let them continue their search for a few more minutes, observing their movements, their growing frustration, as the hidden safe, which I had emptied of anything truly valuable weeks ago, resisted Mark's clumsy attempts. The only items remaining within were a few outdated insurance policies and a rather sentimental but monetarily worthless class ring from my college days. The irony was not lost on me. They were risking serious criminal charges for what amounted to pocket change and a piece of costume jewelry. It spoke volumes about their intelligence, or lack thereof. Row costume jewelry. It spoke volumes about their intelligence. Row to percepence. Rowki perception sentience. The irony was not lost on me. They were risking serious criminal. Laura finally snapped at Mark, her voice a harsh whisper picked up by the microphone near the desk. "This is taking too long." He muttered something back, a defensive curse. So, he had information, or thought he did. Had she been that careless? Or had I, in some forgotten conversation, mentioned its existence? It hardly mattered now. Their complicity was absolute. My focus shifted from passive observation to active preparation. I pulled up the contact details for Arthur Jenkins, my solicitor. Arthur was old school, meticulous, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He'd handled my parents' estate and had been my go-to for any serious legal matters for over a decade. He knew of my deployment, and I'd even had a hypothetical, non-specific conversation with him about asset protection in the event of marital breakdown before I left. Another small, prudent step fueled by that persistent, gnawing unease. He wouldn't be surprised by a late-night call, nor by the nature of the problem. Next, I opened a secure messaging application to contact my sister, Catherine. She was a pragmatist, fiercely loyal, and lived only a 30-minute drive from my house. She would be my eyes and ears on the ground once the initial storm passed. The feed showed Mark finally succeeding in prying open the small safe. His triumphant grunt was audible, followed by Laura's eager crowding. I watched as he pulled out the meager contents, his shoulders slumping. "Is that it?" Laura's voice was shrill, laced with disbelief and anger. "All that for this junk?" Mark threw the papers down in disgust. He must have moved the good stuff. The bastard must have known. Known what? That his wife was a duplicitous thief? That she'd enlist her lover to help her ransack their home while he was serving his country? The audacity was breathtaking. He kicked the desk, a futile gesture of impotent rage. Laura began to pace, her earlier confidence visibly evaporating, replaced by a frantic energy. "We have to find it. Check the master bedroom, the closet safes." "Closet safes? Plural?" She clearly had an inflated idea of my hidden wealth, or perhaps of how carelessly I managed it. This was the moment. They were agitated, their initial plan in tatters, likely to become more reckless, more destructive. I had enough. I initiated the call to Arthur, who, true to form, answered on the third ring, his voice calm and alert despite the ungodly hour. I explained the situation concisely, transmitting the saved video clip as I spoke. "Arthur," I said, my voice level, betraying none of the glacial fury solidifying within me, "I need you to liaise with the local police. I want them apprehended on site, if possible. And I need divorce proceedings initiated at the earliest possible moment. Irreconcilable differences, adultery, and, I suspect, attempted grand larceny." Arthur absorbed the information without comment, then said, "Understood. I'll make the necessary calls." "Are you activating any on-site deterrents?" "Imminently," I replied. "I'll inform you when the local authorities are en route." After disconnecting, I pulled up the local police department's non-emergency number. Better to have a clear line and provide detailed information than a panicked 911 call that might be misconstrued. But before that, a little psychological seasoning was in order. I navigated to the security system's control panel for the internal audio. They were now in the master bedroom. Drawers were being pulled open, objects thrown aside. Laura was becoming increasingly hysterical. "It has to be here. He wouldn't leave without making sure I couldn't touch his precious money," she shrieked, the irony apparently lost on her. I selected a pre-recorded audio file, my own voice, calm and measured, the same tone I used for formal briefings. "Laura, Mark, I see you." The effect was instantaneous. They froze. The live feed showed their heads snapping up, looking around wildly. Laura's face, even in the monochrome of the night vision, was a mask of terror. Mark looked more confused than scared, then a dawning horror spread across his features. "What was that?" he whispered. Laura was speechless, clutching her throat. "Your search for my precious money is proving rather fruitless, isn't it?" My recorded voice continued, the speakers in the master bedroom delivering the message with perfect clarity. "Perhaps because there's nothing of significant value left for you to steal." This was the leverage point, not just the physical evidence, but the psychological unraveling. They knew they were caught, not by some random chance, but by my direct, albeit remote, intervention. The illusion of control they possessed had shattered. Mark grabbed Laura's arm. "We need to get out of here. He knows. He's watching." She finally seemed to break free from her paralysis, a choked sob escaping her. They stumbled out of the bedroom, no longer methodical, but clumsy with panic, desperate to escape. They didn't even bother with the duffel bag anymore. It lay forgotten on the living room floor. It was time to involve the authorities directly. I dialed the police, identified myself, my location overseas, and calmly explained that a burglary was in progress at my home, perpetrated by my wife and her known accomplice. I provided their names, descriptions, and confirmed I had live video evidence of their actions, including their current attempts to flee. I also mentioned that the suspects were aware they were being observed, which might make them unpredictable. The dispatcher was professional, efficient. Officers would be dispatched immediately. I switched my attention back to the security feeds, a grim satisfaction settling in. The house was equipped with magnetic locks on the external doors, a feature I could control. As they fumbled with the front doorknob, I engaged the lock. A satisfying thunk echoed faintly. Their panicked yelps were clearly audible. They tried the back door, then the patio doors. Each attempt met with the same silent, implacable resistance. They were trapped. Trapped in the house they had come to pillage. Trapped by the systems Laura had dismissed as paranoia. My paranoia was now their cage. Mark started shouting, banging on the front door, calling for help, a bizarre twist of fate for a would-be burglar. Laura had sunk to the floor, weeping uncontrollably. The predator had become the prey, cornered by unseen, unyielding technology directed by a mind she had fatally underestimated. The flashing blue and red lights painting the windows were my next visual cue. The police had arrived, far quicker than I had anticipated, a testament to the dispatcher's efficiency and perhaps the clarity of my information. I watched as officers surrounded the house, their approach cautious but firm. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent peal. Then, a loud, authoritative voice. "This is the police. Occupants of the house, come to the front door with your hands visible." Mark, galvanized by a new, more immediate fear, scrambled to the door, shouting, "We're in here! She locked us in! We didn't do anything." Laura remained a crumpled heap on the floor. The irony of his claim, "She locked us in," was particularly piquant, though he was directing it at Laura, not me. He clearly didn't grasp the full extent of his predicament. Through the external cameras, I saw the police patiently waiting. After a moment, with no response from the door itself, they used a key from the lockbox, the code for which I had provided to the dispatcher. The system, of course, logged its use. The door opened, and Mark practically fell into the arms of the waiting officers, babbling about being trapped, about misunderstandings. Laura had to be helped to her feet, a truly pathetic sight. I continued to record everything, every word, every incriminating gesture. The police were professional, separating them, beginning their initial questioning on the porch. Mark, predictably, tried to throw Laura under the bus immediately. It was her idea. She said it was her husband's stuff that he wouldn't mind. She has the keys. Laura, in turn, looked utterly broken, incapable of stringing a coherent sentence together, alternating between sobs and wide-eyed terror. The initial officers on scene were soon joined by a detective, likely alerted by the unusual circumstances I'd relayed, the homeowner observing remotely from a war zone, so to speak. My lawyer, Arthur, called back shortly after. "Daniel, the police are on site. They have 2 individuals in custody, a Laura Michelson and a Mark Jennings. Does that conform with your information?" "Perfectly, Arthur," I replied, the cold precision in my voice unwavering. "They were apprehended inside the premises. Apparently, they found themselves unexpectedly unable to leave." Arthur made a sound that might have been a suppressed chuckle. "Indeed." The arresting officer mentioned something about the doors being inexplicably secured. A fortunate malfunction, I presume. One could say that, I agreed. Fortunate for the cause of justice. He informed me he was already drafting the initial divorce petition, citing adultery and attempted theft of assets. He would also be filing for an emergency restraining order on my behalf, preventing Laura from returning to the property or attempting to contact me, except through legal counsel. The efficiency was bracing. The pieces were moving, the consequences beginning to unfold, with an almost Newtonian certainty. Their actions had created an equal and opposite reaction, one I had meticulously prepared for, even if I had hoped it would never be necessary. The hours that followed were a blur of communication, providing a formal statement to the detective via a secure video link, forwarding all the video and audio recordings, answering clarifying questions. Catherine, my sister, was informed and, after her initial shock and outrage, proved to be the rock I knew she would be. She agreed to meet with Arthur the next day, to act as my local proxy for any immediate needs regarding the house or legal matters. The sun was beginning to rise in my remote corner of the world, painting the desolate landscape in hues of orange and gray. I hadn't slept, yet I felt strangely alert, a grim energy coursing through me. The unraveling of Laura and Mark's sordid little enterprise was well underway. Their arrogance, their greed, their utter contempt for me had led them directly into a trap of their own making, a trap I had merely baited and set with the tools of foresight and a refusal to be a victim. The satisfaction was not a joyful one. It was the quiet, solemn satisfaction of a complex equation being solved, of a necessary, if painful, task being executed with precision. The mess they had created would take time to clean up, but the foundation for that cleanup, for my eventual disengagement from their toxicity, was now firmly, irrevocably laid. The legal machinery, once engaged, ground forward with relentless efficiency. Arthur was a maestro, orchestrating the various components of my counter-offensive with practiced skill. The divorce petition was filed within 24 hours, citing clear evidence of adultery and the attempted criminal enterprise. The video footage was incontrovertible. Laura and Mark's faces, their actions, their panicked admissions when they realized they were being observed, it was all there, time-stamped and digitally secured. Their initial arraignment was a swift affair. Bail was set surprisingly high, given Mark's assertions of it all being a misunderstanding and Laura's lawyer attempting a defense of emotional distress. The prosecution, armed with my recordings, painted a clear picture of premeditated intent. They were charged with attempted burglary, conspiracy, and various lesser offenses related to property damage. Laura's parents, when contacted, were reportedly horrified and ashamed, offering little in the way of support for their daughter beyond securing a bewildered local attorney. Mark's bravado, I was told, evaporated quickly once he was facing a serious stretch of time. He tried to negotiate a plea deal, offering to testify against Laura in exchange for leniency. It was a classic move of a coward, and it only served to highlight the pathetic nature of their alliance. The community, a small, relatively close-knit suburban enclave where appearances mattered, was abuzz. News travels fast, and the salacious details of a wife attempting to rob her deployed husband with her lover were too juicy to remain confidential for long. Laura, who had cultivated an image of a devoted, slightly lonely wife patiently waiting for her husband's return, was exposed. Her social standing, I imagine, dissolved overnight. My return from deployment, several months later, was to a very different landscape. The house felt alien, tainted by their presence, by their betrayal. Catherine had overseen the changing of the locks, an ironic necessity given my remote control capabilities, and a thorough cleaning. But the psychic residue remained. Arthur had already secured a default judgment in the divorce proceedings. Laura, facing criminal charges and overwhelming evidence, had offered no contest to my terms, which were, shall we say, uncompromising. Given the infidelity clauses in our prenuptial agreement, another piece of foresight she'd casually dismissed as unromantic years ago, and the blatant criminality of her actions, she was entitled to virtually nothing from the marital assets. The house was mine, free and clear. Her share of any joint accounts had been frozen and was largely offset by damages and legal fees. Poetic justice had a distinct financial sting. Mark, I learned, eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, receiving a short custodial sentence and a lengthy probation. Laura, portrayed by her lawyer as a manipulated, emotionally fragile woman, received a suspended sentence, probation, and mandated counseling. Her punishment was more social and financial than carceral. She lost her home, her reputation, and any claim to the comfortable life she had clearly taken for granted. The last I heard, she had moved back in with her parents, a pariah in the town where she grew up. It was a quiet, ignominious end to her ambitions. There was no triumph in this, no celebratory fist pump, just a profound, weary sense of closure. The process had been methodical, a step-by-step dismantling of a life built on deceit. My preparations, born of a vague disquiet, had proven to be not paranoia but an accurate assessment of latent risk. I had simply refused to be a passive victim of someone else's greed and disloyalty. My colleagues often remarked on my calm under pressure, my ability to think strategically in chaotic situations. I suppose I applied the same principles to my personal life when it came under direct attack. One observes, one analyzes, one prepares, and then, if necessary, one acts decisively. In the aftermath, I found a strange kind of peace. The betrayal had been a brutal lesson in human nature, but it had also been a crucible, burning away illusions and leaving behind a harder, clearer understanding of what truly mattered: integrity, loyalty, self-respect. I sold the house eventually. Too many ghosts, too many shadows of what had been and what had been so cruelly attempted. I moved to a new city, started fresh, carrying with me not bitterness, but a reinforced conviction in the value of vigilance and the quiet strength of preparedness. They thought they could take advantage of my absence, my perceived vulnerability. They failed to understand that true strength isn't always about physical presence. Sometimes, it's about the foresight to build defenses, the intelligence to lay traps, and the resolve to see justice done, however quietly, however methodically. They had sought to rob me of my possessions, my security. Instead, they had only succeeded in robbing themselves of their freedom, their dignity, and their futures. And I had simply ensured the scales of justice, so violently tipped, were meticulously and irrevocably set right.